Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. I am so excited to be here in front of you. I was rehearsing last week, and I realized with the amount of content I had, I would need 4 hours. But I have the best of what I had previously to share with you. The only thing I worry about, people in here and those watching virtually, you might need some seatbelts, because we just have a lot to talk about. But before we jump in and go too deep, I just want to set some perspective. Usually with friends and family, and other people, when the topic of NFT first comes up, and this happened to me too, we first try to wrap your brains around what this thing is. Most often, the knee-jerk reaction seems to be, it's just a JPEG, right? Or, hey, look, I can take a screenshot of your NFT and copy it, right? And that's understandably so, and we'll be talking about collections that have to do with photos. But the future of NFTs really is the metadata and the utility that they're able to provide. I'll try to touch on some of that, but if you look at the most high market cap collections in the market, it's not talked about it often, but probably will become obvious in a couple of months and years, that these are actually utility tokens, not really photos or bored monkeys inherently, right? So from a monetary perspective, if you take a look at the highest market cap collection today, the CryptoPunks, you'll see that their market cap is $1 million. And mind you, that's in ETH, right? So as of today, I think the price of ETH is around $1,200 US. So we have a NFT collection that has a market cap of $1 billion, right? And you kind of go down that list, and you'll see a couple hundred million, a couple hundred million. And also keep in mind that we're still early. We're just getting started with the money that's pouring in here, right? And so it becomes a lucrative target for attackers as well as people who want to make sure that we're well protected. And then it's not just about the market cap, but it's also about the trade volume, right? So every time you sell an NFT or buy one, you pay the NFT marketplace a percentage of the sales, and you also pay the owner of the NFT collection whatever the royalty they would like to receive. So if you look at OpenSea, that's the most populous NFT marketplace, to date they have done about $40 billion worth of volume in their marketplace. And OpenSea takes about 2.5% of every sale. So you do the math, they've probably made about a cool $1 billion in revenue so far, right? Not a bad place to be if all you are a website where I can just trade tokens made by somebody else. And again, just keep in mind, we're just getting started. And when you think about the blockchain, specifically Ethereum, I would say it's true for all blockchains, you'll find something peculiar from a math perspective, right? Is that there is no concept, and this is intentionally, of a floating point or a decimal number. Right? So when somebody sends you 1 ETH or Ether, you basically get 1 followed by 18 zeros, right? And so the idea there is, instead of dealing with the complexities and nuances of decimals, you could fractionalize your 1 ETH however you like within those 18 zeros, right? And then you have people that are in Middle Earth, like you and me, that have to write code using JavaScript, TypeScript, Python to interact with these smart contracts. And in our Middle Earth, we have decimals, right? So one thing you'll find is that becomes a ripe attack space where when you look at JavaScript, the max int that's possible before it vomits on you is much, much lesser than the value of a typical unsigned int in the Ethereum blockchain, which is 2 to the power of 256 minus 1. And so we'll see a lot of underflows and overflows occurring in the Middle Earth code. What we also see, quite understandably so, is the number 0 appearing and causing havoc. Right? And when I say understandably so, it's because I think from what I understand, in our human life, we don't encounter zero as we're like walking around the park. Like you're not gonna take a look at a space that lacks a bunch of flowers and admire it, right? So you're probably not gonna really look for the absence of things unless you have some really great friends and mushrooms going on, right? So the other element is that when you look at the number 0, it's really why we're here, in the sense that you start with binary, base 2, you have 1, and you need the 0, right, for anything to make sense. And when you have base 2 figured out, you build base 3, 4, 5, 10 that we used to in 16. But if without the placeholder that is 0, but signifies the absence of something, you couldn't have anything, right? So there's that craziness from a philosophical and mathematical perspective that's probably at play here. So let's just take an example. Here's LooksRare, the second most popular NFT platform. And in order to incentivize people to list on their platform, they came up with a great idea, and it still works. It's amazing. Where what they do is every day they set aside about $400,000, and then they reward people that have NFTs listed on their platform. Right. So because OpenSea is much more popular, this is incentive for people to come to LooksRare and list their NFTs. Now, there's a gotcha element to it, where LooksRare will give you more rewards the closer you are to the floor price. And what is the floor price? The floor price is the cheapest NFT that's listed for sale in any given NFT collection. Right? So, for example, if an NFT that you own is worth $100,000 at the floor price, but you list it for $2 million, you're not going to get the rewards, because it's highly unlikely that somebody's going to transact and buy your NFT, and LooksRare wants that 2%, right? And one of the things I realized with LooksRare is you could list your NFT for sale for 0, and you'd be stupid to do that, because if you were to try to do that, within milliseconds there will be a bot that will take your NFT for 0. Right? But what you could also do, I found, is that you could list it for amount 0. Right, in the off-chain world, that is their website. And once you do that, because it allowed me to do that, and then somebody tries to buy the NFT, the smart contract reverts. Because on the top you can see the logic code that's in the smart contract. They say the amount has to be greater than 0. Makes sense. But now you have a disparity between the off-chain world, which is the website, and the on-chain. So what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that if I'm able to list an NFT for sale for 0 that nobody can buy, what does that do to the floor price? The floor goes to 0. Right? So if you were to take an NFT in the $1 billion punk collection or a couple of other NFTs that have a high market cap, and you list it for sale in a way that the floor price is 0, you will see panic. Right? You will see NFT holders, for example, if you may hold an NFT that you think is worth $50,000, and you see the floor is at 0, you're probably want to exit, because the price is tending towards the floor. That's usually what ends up happening. And this opens up an attack vector where if you're the attacker, your investment would have to be an NFT each from the high market cap collections. List them for 0, amount 0, nobody can buy. Watch the panic happen. Price drops, right? And then as the price drops, you as the attacker then go in and buy it for really cheap. And by the time LooksRare or whatever marketplace fixes their thing, and the price goes back up, you exit for profit. Right? So this is like a combination of somewhat of an input validation issue, but in order to really figure out what the attack vector is, you really have to understand the business dynamics at play here. Right? The other side effect of something like this is that when you look at OpenSea and LooksRare, their floor price that these two marketplaces advertise are relied upon by other smart contracts. There are the smart contracts that have loaned out millions and hundreds of millions of dollars worth of crypto for NFTs. Right? So there's marketplaces where you can actually provide your NFT and borrow money. But in these smart contracts, using Chainlink, will monitor what LooksRare and OpenSea are saying about the floor price. So if you're able to take the floor price momentarily and get it to zero, you would liquidate hundreds of millions or billions of dollars of loans just by doing that. Right? So there's that, if you're running a marketplace, you have to have a very crisp understanding of what the floor price is and what the big deal is here. And I will tell you, when I reported these to LooksRare, they were pretty great. They got it. However, there's some other marketplaces that I had trouble with the incident response team and triagers that I had to explain to them why the floor price is important, right? And I think that is a bad thing. And so takeaway number one is that external researchers should not have to explain your business dynamics to your incident response team. Right? That's just a very awkward place to be, and it's just a bad sign. Right? So, one of the things I would recommend is that if you have any business whatsoever to do with the blockchain, it doesn't have to be about NFTs. Take a look at, if you have a bug bounty program or you have external researchers contacting you, take a look at some of the cases that have been submitted in the past and make sure that your triagers and your incident response team are able to understand what's actually being reported. So let's do that again. Here again in LooksRare, after they fixed the previous issue, I was kind of reverse engineering how the NFT marketplace works. One of the things that stood out is, how does the off-chain world communicate with the on-chain world, right? And in the case of LooksRare, the way they do it is by using a nonce, which we're mostly familiar with in computer science, where every time you list something on sale on LooksRare, your nonce that's based on your wallet increases by 1, right? So for example, you list 5 things for sale, your nonce starts at 0, now it's at 4, and then imagine you decide that you don't want to sell those 4 things anymore. Well, then based on the architecture, what you end up doing is you say, cancel my listing, and you'll watch LooksRare do 2 things. One, it'll remove your listing off-chain, and when I say listing, your payload actually has your signature on it, your signed signature. And then what it also does, it'll spawn your MetaMask wallet, where you will connect to the smart contract and say, hey, going forward, 4 or less than 4, if you get a payload for any of those with that nonce, do not let the transaction go through. So basically, you're canceling your order on-chain as well, which is very important. And so there's this play between the off-chain world and the on-chain world, and they kind of sync up using nonces. In this case, that I was testing, I looked up my nonce in the off-chain side of things, and it ended up being 103. And then what I was able to do is connect with the LooksRare smart contract and say, hey, going forward, 99,999 is the lowest nonce you'll accept. Anything above that is great. And then I made the listing. We had the same effect. I was able to make the listing for 0.001, watch the floor price crash, and nobody could buy it, because when somebody tried to transact it, the smart contract complained the nonce is expired. And the off-chain world has no idea this is going on. So this created a situation where there is no way to get out of this. The only way to get out of this is to use a completely new wallet address, right? Which may be easier for some of us, but probably not an experience you want your customers to go through. Now, I had to cut out a lot of stuff, but I'll tell you, I could show you 20 different examples of where the off-chain world tries to glue into the on-chain smart contract, and they're not able to do it in the right way. And I've talked to a lot of people in the industry, and I've come to realize, in my opinion, the root cause of this and this is pretty rampant, is that organizations that build applications on top of blockchains have this really bad habit of organizing their engineering teams in such a way that they have a separate smart contract team, and then you have a separate team that does the Web 2 or 3 gluing into the smart contract. And it is my professional opinion that is a no-no. You don't have two separate teams, right? And so takeaway number 2 is all the engineers, if you have anything to do with the blockchain, even if you're researching with it, you have to make sure the team working on it can do off-chain and on-chain, and then they cycle through that, those responsibilities. No silos, right? And the other thing I would also say is if you're a board member or somebody that the product security leader reports into, try and find out how they think about this, right? And if the answer you get is, I have a really smart team that does a smart contract and this other team does something else, fire them. Because that's not how it's supposed to work, right? And these are the fundamentals. So we're still on 0. And speaking of 0, I'd like to introduce you to 0x. I think that's how the project team says it, but I looked through the documentation, there was no how to pronounce her name thing. So I'm calling it 0x, because that's the name. Think of 0x as a library of smart contracts for the public good, right? So what's happened in the blockchain world is more than 60 to 70% of the time, people issue their own cryptocurrency, right? And then they want their users to be able to swap in and out of their own cryptocurrency. And so they write a swap function. And what 0x really is a bunch of functions that people write and rewrite in the smart contract world, so that if you're writing contracts that most people write contracts for, instead of writing your own contract, you could just use 0x. Right? So theoretically, you could launch a DApp or decentralized application without writing a single piece of code by leveraging 0x. And during my research of how people are, I was really curious on how people are using 0x as a library. And I stumbled upon about 5 different contracts with this pseudocode, right? And these contracts, by the way, are still live. 3 of them have more than $1 million. So if you can find these, you can take the $1 million. So what the pseudocode that describes these contracts, what they're doing is they're taking a raw payload from an arbitrary user and then calling the 0x swap function, but instead of actually calling the specific function, they're just sending the raw payload. So it's like, life lesson here is whenever you have the word raw and payload bubble up to your consciousness, pause for a moment and ask, what can go wrong, right? Because a lot can go wrong and has gone wrong here, is that the people who've written these 5 contracts that I was able to find, I think there's probably more of them out there, are expecting that the payload begin with the 2, what we call function descriptors, right? Which is basically the name of the function. They're expecting that all the payloads will call the swap function. And I think my guess on why this may have been is that when the 0x project started earlier on, they only had swap functions. And then later on, they added more and more, and the smart contracts that were written in the past, right? And so, for example, the 0x bunch of contracts don't just have swap functions. They have the ERC-721 function, ERC-721 being an NFT standard. So now you can exploit this to steal money from a contract using a fake NFT from a contract that has nothing to do with NFTs, right? So you could basically send this contract a payload that looks like this, right? Where the function descriptor is really by ERC-721, and in the red in hex is how much ever money you want. You'll probably want to pick the amount of money that's in the smart contract, and you send this your way, and there's an you also have to replace one more parameter with your fake NFT address, and you'll find that the smart contract responds by buying your fake NFT and giving you all the money that's in the smart contract. So there's that. Now let's take the 0x thing a bit further. As I mentioned, it also has functions that let you buy ERC-721 tokens and also 1155. In essence, what 0x has done here is you can create your own OpenSea and look for a competitor without writing a single piece of smart contract blockchain code, but just leveraging their libraries. And if you were to do so, if you were to launch your own NFT marketplace, the code there shows you all the parameters that you would need to really understand. And the onus will be on you in the off-chain world to make sure you're not listing orders with arbitrary parameters. For example, one of the parameters there is the address of the contract that signifies the currency. In most cases, you want it to be a bunch of E's, which signifies Ether. The other case, you probably want it to be the address of the wrapped Ether token. Or you'll probably also want to allow USDC, DAI, right? But if you're creating marketplace with this 0x bunch of contracts, you have to check that before you allow those listings, right? So what I found in about 4 different marketplaces, and I'll talk to you about the first one, they didn't check the currency, right? So what you can also do in an NFT marketplace is if you have an NFT, I can send you an offer, even if you haven't listed for sale. But especially if you listed for sale, you're probably paying attention, right? And when you send an offer, depending on the marketplace, you probably get an email, some notification that you have an offer. So imagine you get an offer for 100,000 ETH. You're probably going to pay attention to that. I would. So you could send an offer for 100,000 ETH. Because the marketplace assumes that this is all ETH, the way this is written, or USDC. But because there's nothing being checked, I could create my LOL token out of thin air and basically offer you 100,000 of my LOL token. But the offer in the UI marketplace will come through as 100,000 ETH, right? And then when you accept the offer, to add insult to injury, not only is your NFT taken away from you, you don't even get the LOL token. And here's how. There's also the fees parameter. And what's supposed to go in there is the amount of fees that's taken out for the marketplace and also for the royalty that the contract wants to get, right? And if that can be arbitrary, in this case it was, what an attacker can do is basically say that they are the recipient of all the money. And so the victim gets 0. Let me show you what this looks like in a simulation to prove that this would work. Here we run the simulation and we find that it goes through, that the attacker gets 0, and the seller pays 0. Well, let's run that again, but with more detail. All right, so what's going on here? You go back up, as I mentioned, in the payload that the off-chain accepted, the attacker sneaked in the address of their own LOL token and said, I'm going to pay 0. Then sneaked in their own address and said, I'm going to pay myself 100,000 of these tokens. And then you see the LOL token of 0 go from the attacker to the seller. The attacker gets the NFT. And then the attacker basically pays themselves 100,000 of their own token, right? I have a habit of calling this the J-Pow attack, where J-Pow meaning Jerome Powell, because I think he knows how to print money out of thin air, if you've been keeping up. I know we're close to time, so I'm going to leave you with this one other thing that I'm seeing, is that from an off-chain perspective, here's an NFT lending application that has done about $40 million worth of volume. And basically what you can do is if you have an NFT, you want to loan money against your NFT, or you want to supply the collateral, you would go here. And this thing has done a lot of transactions so far. But here's the catch. Say you go to this website and you say, okay, I want to loan 10 ETH for this NFT collections, and I want to earn interest as people borrow my 10 ETH. You'll happily make the listing. For example, let's just assume you mistyped that 2,000 ETH and you have 1,000 ETH in your wallet. And if you're lucky and the bot doesn't take it, you can go and click delete. And it doesn't matter if you can't read it, but on the bottom right, it just says, okay, yeah, delete it. But the crazy thing here is there is no on-chain interaction. So this marketplace is recording your signatures on the back end, and an attacker, by the time, every time you make one, can also record these things. And there's no telling the smart contract to cancel, never accept this payload. So, in the future, my estimate is that anybody recording these signatures, depending if the floor price goes up or down, can rug pull people who think that their offers or listings have been canceled, but they have not, right? The other way to think about it, and I'm not saying this about this marketplace, or could be, is that if I was a marketplace where I wanted to eventually rug pull meaning steal money from my users at a future date and make it look like it was an honest mistake, this is how I would do it. Right? I guess you could say that about anything. So there's a lot I couldn't talk about, but you kind of sum those things together. One of my predictions is that in the next coming months, that it's the NFT collateral lending, smart contracts, and DAOs is where I see the next generation of, unfortunately, rug pulls coming and people losing money. Kind of sum it all up, what do we do about all of this? I think, again, we're still early, and I kind of look at the NFT world and the blockchain world as, look at what happened to PGP. It makes sense. But until you have a UI where the normal users don't have to worry about the technical details, we're going to have to deal with stuff like this, right? So unless we get to a world where people can transact with NFTs without even knowing what an NFT is, that's when we'll get there. But until we get there, unfortunately, all of us will have to be technically proficient to make sure that the transactions they're committing to are not going to cause them harm.